I'm Claire and welcome to my channel. So today's video is going to be my annual perfume declutter analysis. I've done this video a few years now, 2023, 2024 if you do want to look back, and I'm just going to update it for this year. Really with this kind of analysis, I'm trying to find whether there are trends in the fragrances that people are decluttering from their collections. Is there a particular fragrance that is troublesome? Is there something that people just don't like about it? And also, are there particular brands that are more likely to be decluttered than others? Are there particular categories of fragrances that are more likely to be decluttered than others? So if you haven't seen me before, I'm Claire. I'm a scientist in real life, and I think that really gives me a unique perspective on YouTube as to fragrance and also as to behaviours on YouTube. I love looking at perfume science, perfume history, and I also just review fragrances as well. So if that kind of thing interests you, and you haven't already done so, then please do consider subscribing, and please also press the like button if you do like this kind of content. So I wanted to do an updated version of this video just to see whether there were any changes in the trends that I was seeing from last year, but I also just wanted to make this video even better by looking at more data from more videos from more creators to try to identify even more trends. So if you've not seen the videos from 2023 and 2024, I will leave them linked down in the description box below in case you do want to catch up on those. But let's get on with this. Let's look at 2025's analysis. So firstly, how many videos have I actually watched to do this analysis? So over a 104-day period, I watched a total of 56 declutter videos, which actually produced a data set of 601 fragrances. Last year, I only looked at 40 videos over a total of 76 days, and in 2023, I looked at 21 declutter videos over only 40 days. So clearly this data set is much bigger than before. Secondly, how have I identified those videos? So I searched on YouTube using the term Perfume Declutter, and I ordered those videos by most recent, and I just watched all of the videos in the last 104 days from the period from the 27th of July up to the 8th of November. The inclusion criteria were that the videos had to include at least one perfume, so if there were body sprays, I did not count those. Also, if it was unclear what the creator was actually decluttering and what they were keeping, if there was some debate there, I would exclude that video. Because of that, I ended up excluding 5 videos from this analysis. When I'd obtained the 601 fragrances from those videos, I then divided those fragrances into different categories. So for example, designer, niche, including mass market niche and more general kind of smaller brand niche, as well as Middle Eastern fragrances, and also celebrity fragrances, clone fragrances. So I should be able to analyse the data set and look at those trends within those different classes of perfumes. So how diverse is this data set? Where are we looking at videos from? So out of the 56 videos that I watched, they were actually created by 45 different creators. And yes, that means that over a period of 104 days, some creators are producing more than one declutter video. I noticed that one creator in particular had produced 5 separate declutter videos in this 104-day period, which really struck me as something that creators might be doing in order to increase their watch time or increase their views, because declutter videos get a lot of traffic on YouTube, and it's probably a great strategy to help your channel grow because you're going to get more exposure from creating declutter content. The channels that I looked at ranged from 8 subscribers all the way up to 251,000 subscribers. So a huge range of the channels that were producing declutter content, but the geography of the declutter content was really focused heavily on the US. Canadian YouTubers were also represented, as well as one from Switzerland, one from Italy, and also some from the UK, but most of the content that I watched was emanating from the US. The median channel size of the videos that I looked at was 3,400 subscribers, which was lower than last year, perhaps suggesting that smaller content creators are creating more declutter content to grow their channels. The mean number of fragrances decluttered per video was 11 and the median was 10. And that was actually lower than last year when the number was 12, and the year before the number was 14. So clearly people are perhaps decluttering fewer fragrances per video in order to produce more content. So next, let's look at the makeup of the categories across those 601 fragrances. So 42.3% of fragrances I categorised as niche, and those comprise 254 fragrances of the 601 total. So interestingly, last year the percentage was actually much lower at 29.4%, and that number had decreased from 2023 when it was actually making up 37% of declutters. And certainly I've seen a move towards a greater number of brands within the niche category, and also a shift towards the owning of more affordable niche brands. So next, let's look at designer fragrances. So designer fragrances comprised 158 fragrances of the total, which means that they accounted for 26.3% of the total. This percentage is lower than last year at 32.7%, and the previous year it was 33.8%. So clearly there's been some trend away from designer fragrances. So I wanted to look at Middle Eastern fragrances, affordable Middle Eastern fragrances, separately to the other categories. Even though Middle Eastern fragrances could be categorised as niche fragrances, I thought it'd be interesting to see the trends within that category separately. So this year, 95 fragrances from the affordable Middle Eastern brands were decluttered, which makes up 15.8% of the total overall. Last year, I noted a huge increase in the percentage of Middle Eastern fragrances being decluttered, because it was up massively from 2023 when the percentage was only 8.5%. So this plateauing in the percentage of Middle Eastern fragrances being decluttered could suggest a number of things, but I think it maybe reflects the wider availability of Middle Eastern fragrances now, and it maybe also reflects perhaps a slight cooling in the hype for Middle Eastern fragrances. Perhaps there haven't been any particularly big hits. I think it's rare now that you find one Middle Eastern fragrance being dominant. I feel like the last fragrances we had that were like that were things like Yara by Lattafa and also maybe Camera by Lattafa. So next I looked at celebrity fragrances, and this year 38 fragrances were categorised as belonging to celebrity brands, which means that 6.3% were celebrity fragrances. This compares to last year as an increase, but back in 2023, 10.8% of the fragrances that were decluttered were celebrity fragrances. I think this noticeable reduction might reflect the fact that there really hasn't been one big celebrity hit fragrance over the last few years. I think really the last one we saw was probably Billie Eilish. And I think without that mass purchasing, that mass ownership of fragrances, you aren't going to see large numbers of celebrity fragrances being decluttered in subsequent years. So I think that might be why that trend is there. So next I wanted to look to see whether there were any particular brands in each of these categories that were being decluttered more than any other, and whether there were particular fragrances that were being decluttered more than any other. So starting with celebrity fragrances, as I said, 6.3% of the fragrances decluttered were categorised as celebrity fragrances. Of those fragrances, the biggest brands making up that category were Ariana Grande and also Britney Spears. We would expect this. Those are probably the two biggest selling celebrity fragrance brands on the market and have been for a while. So both brands had 7 fragrances each decluttered from them, and the most frequently decluttered fragrances within this category with 2 declutters each were Ariana Grande's Thank You Next 2.0, Billie Eilish's Eilish No. 2, Kim Kardashian's Fleur Fatale, quite an old fragrance, and also a new fragrance, Selena Gomez's Rare. I think in general these declutters reflect basically flankers that haven't lived up to the hype. So for example, Ariana Grande's Thank You Next 2.0, I feel like people will have bought that to review it and then perhaps not got on with it and decluttered it. I think with Billie Eilish No. 2, it was a very different fragrance, wasn't it, to Billie Eilish No. 1. And I think with Selena Gomez's Rare, people were perhaps a bit shocked that it had such a similarity to Burberry Goddess, when really if you went to the Middle Eastern fragrance market, you could probably get a much better dupe at a much more reasonable price. So yeah, interesting that those fragrances came out as being decluttered more than others in this category. So next I looked at store brand fragrances. So what do I mean by these? I mean things like Zara fragrances or fragrances from other physical stores. So last year these fragrances were making up 3.6% of the fragrances that were decluttered in total, and the year before it was 6%. This year it was 5.7%. The brand being most frequently decluttered was Zara with 14 fragrances. That's no change from last year. Zara are nearly always the most decluttered in this category. They release a lot of fragrances per year. They are basically the fast fashion of the fragrance world, other than the Middle Eastern fragrance brands. Noticeably, I saw many fragrances from the Vanilla collection, which came out quite recently, being decluttered. And I guess channel owners would have bought that collection perhaps to review the whole collection. And it's a very affordable collection as well. So it's something that really is going to give them a lot of views for not a lot of money. Because Zara fragrance reviews do get a lot of views. If you look on YouTube, they are some of the most watched fragrance videos on YouTube. Interestingly, no one single fragrance was decluttered more than once in this category, and that may reflect just the huge number of fragrances that are put out by store brands. And I did notice as well that one particular influencer decluttered 6 Zara fragrances in just one video. So clearly, people do have large collections of Zara fragrances on YouTube. Importantly, Zara fragrances are also things that you may blind buy, because really it's far easier to find a Zara fragrance online than it is to go in store and hunt for one. So I think that might also be coming into perhaps why people are choosing to declutter them. Obviously they're affordable, but also it might have been a blind buy situation. So next up, let's go back to the designer fragrances and look at the brands being decluttered in that category. So there were 158 fragrances totaling 26.3%. So the most decluttered brands were in third place with 6 fragrances, Burberry. In second equal place with 7 fragrances each, Valentino, Mugler, Lancôme and Jimmy Choo. And in first equal place were 2 brands with 10 fragrances being decluttered each. And it was Dior. They also were the most decluttered last year. But along with them were Dolce & Gabbana. I always think a brand being the most decluttered reflects somewhat its popularity. I think when you look at people's collections, you will more often see a Dior fragrance in people's collections than you will see a Chanel fragrance. They're quite a diverse brand. They have quite a wide offering. And I think that maybe is why they're being decluttered so often, because just more people own them. So were any particular designer fragrance lines being decluttered more than any others? So from Dior, it was really the Hypnotic, Poison and Poison line that was the most decluttered, with 6 declutters. Dolce & Gabbana's Devotion line was decluttered 3 times. 6 fragrances were decluttered from the I Want You line from Jimmy Choo. And Lancôme's La Vie est Belle flankers were decluttered 3 times in total. Much like last year, Valentino's Born in Roma line was also heavily decluttered with 5 declutters. I think this really reflects the popularity of that line, and especially the popularity of that line in the US, and also the fact that that line keeps on pumping out new flankers. There's always something new to review from that line, and I think that keeps people buying. So when I looked at the individual fragrances being decluttered within the designer category, there are a few that stood out as being decluttered more than others. And each of these had 2 declutters each. So there were firstly Jimmy Choo I Want You and I Want You Forever. Also YSL's Black Opium Le Parfum. Dolce & Gabbana's Devotion Intense. Marc Jacobs Dot. And finally Mugler's Angel Elixir. So next let's move on to the affordable Middle Eastern fragrances. So these consisted of 95 fragrances overall, making up 15.8% of the 601 total. The most decluttered brands within this category were Cadillage with 7 fragrances. Also Paris Corner, which is owned by Aroma Concepts. They collectively had 19 declutters. And in first place, as always, is Lattafa. So Lattafa themselves had 27 declutters, but really Lattafa also owns a few other brands. So if we include Maison Alhambra and also Astaf and Rave, then the total goes up to 30. So Lattafa brand fragrances are responsible for around 1/3 of the fragrances within this category. And that makes me wonder how well that reflects their market share overall in the fragrance market. This means that just as a brand in itself, Lattafa represents around 5% of all decluttered fragrances within this analysis. So within the affordable Middle Eastern category, there were certain fragrance lines that were being decluttered more than others. And one that really stood out was Fragrance World's Barakat line. I guess these are trying to clone MFK fragrances, and that might be why they're perhaps not as popular as they once were. I feel as if MFK fragrances are not as widely seen on YouTube anymore. They don't seem to be as popular. And that might be why the dupe fragrances also aren't as popular and are being decluttered. I also noticed Swiss Arabian Shagaf line being decluttered 4 times, and I think that line is probably Swiss Arabian's most successful line to date, and that means that probably more people own that line than other lines in the Swiss Arabian brand, which may be why that line is being decluttered more than any other. I also noticed 3 declutters from Paris Corner's Care line, so Care Fusion and Care Felicity were also in this list. Several fragrances within the Middle Eastern fragrance category were decluttered overall more than once, with each of these being decluttered twice each. So the list includes Paris Corner's Pink and also Care Felicity, Lattafa's Al-Saf, Camera Kawa, Liam Gray, and Victoria, which is said to be duping Devotion by Dolce & Gabbana. Comparing the results in this category to last year, I noticed that there was a greater diversity of brands being decluttered overall. I also noticed that there didn't seem to be any one particular fragrance dominating the declutters. And I think this maybe reflects just the diversity in the Middle Eastern fragrance market. I think it's just so much harder to have a big hit in that market now. I think with the affordable Middle Eastern fragrances, it's just much easier for people to justify blind buying, isn't it? And because of the price point, people don't choose to sample beforehand. They don't buy samples in general. So this is perhaps why this fragrance category does have quite so many declutters. So next, let's look at niche fragrances. So just out of interest, I separated the clean fragrance brands because I noticed a trend last year where this category was increasing, and I wanted to monitor the growth of the clean fragrance brands. In the US especially, clean fragrance is a big area of growth, and I've noticed a lot more brands springing up, and I've also noticed a change in the brands that are dominating the declutters. So in total, 53 fragrances were decluttered that I would consider to be from clean fragrance brands, and that compares to last year's 27 as almost double the amount. There were only 2 fragrances in this category that were decluttered more than once, and those were by Rosie Jane's Dulce and also Ellis Brooklyn's Queen's Caramel. Multiple brands within this category were decluttered a number of times, but the most represented brands were Fleur with 4 declutters, Clean Reserve with 5 declutters, but the runaway winner of most decluttered in this category was Ellis Brooklyn, with 12 fragrances being decluttered in total. So next, let's look at niche brands. So of course, the mass market niche brands are going to dominate the fragrances that are being decluttered. It's really difficult as a small niche brand to have a viral hit. And for a fragrance to be the most decluttered, it has to be owned by a lot of people on YouTube. So ownership could be from just having a really huge hit. So brands such as Perfumes de Marly have had some huge hits over the years, and a lot of people own those fragrances. So you might expect that brand to come up anyway. But also I feel like brands that give out lots of PR are the ones that you see being decluttered more than brands that don't give out PR, because clearly more people are going to own that fragrance if they've been given it for free. So the most decluttered niche brand was, unsurprisingly, and actually for the second year running, Kayali. So 20 fragrances from Kayali were decluttered as part of that 601 total. I actually saw 2 sets of their summer fragrances, their Maui, Capri, whatever else in the bottle, though that set was decluttered twice by creators on YouTube. So automatically, just from 2 creators, they had 8 declutters. I also noticed Yum Bougie Marshmallow being decluttered twice by creators, but really it was a huge diversity of Kayali fragrances that were being decluttered. I didn't see any other repeats within this data set. I think Kayali just have a lot of hype. They give out a lot of PR. So I think as well, just people who don't get PR buy those fragrances because they just are so popular and people watch those reviews. You see lots of Kayali ranking videos even. I think it's just a thing on YouTube for Kayali to be just in a lot of videos, in a lot of content. And that means that a lot of people own those fragrances and a lot of people end up decluttering those fragrances. I think why Kayali are so owned, other than the PR, is because they often bring out their bottles in small formats, which makes buying them very affordable to people who want to review their fragrances. So the other most decluttered brands within the niche category were Tiziana Terenzi with 5 declutters, They were in 4th place, and in 3rd place, equal with 6 declutters each, were Tom Ford, Jo Malone, Bond No. 9 and Mancera. And in 2nd place, with a massive 11 declutters, were Parfums de Marly. When I looked to see the most decluttered fragrance in the niche category, the most decluttered fragrance was Mancera's Coco Vanille. I think this was quite a popular fragrance, so I imagine that just a lot of people own this one. So a lot of people have it available to declutter it. Several other fragrances were decluttered twice each, and those included Tom Ford's Noir Extreme, Parfums de Marly's Delina La Rosée, Tiziana Terenzi Cassiopeia, Maison Martin's Bain de Midi, and Mind Game's French Defense. So lastly, I looked at clone brands, and clone brands are something that I last year saw a lot of decluttering from, and this year there wasn't so much. And I guess that could reflect some changes in the practices of how they're giving out PR, the amount of PR they're giving out, the amount of PR that's being decluttered. Perhaps creators are a little bit more quiet about decluttering PR. Perhaps they don't want to upset those brands. I'm not sure, but it seemed less of a thing this year that people were decluttering Dossier and other fragrance brands. For example, I didn't see any Dewars being decluttered at all, which may suggest that they may be restricting the amount of PR that they're giving out, or perhaps they've got some kind of restrictions that influencers don't like. And that might also be resulting in me not seeing those declutters on YouTube. I'm not sure. So last year, 11.3% of all fragrances that were decluttered were part of these clone brands. In 2023, it had been 6.2%, but this year it was only 3.3%, with only 20 fragrances being decluttered in total. 2 brands dominated the declutter list, and those were Dossier with 9 declutters, and also Juliana's Perfumes with 10 declutters. In fact, one influencer decluttered a total of 9 Juliana perfumes in just one video. The only clone brand fragrance decluttered twice as part of that cohort was Spirit of Mojave, and that is actually a dupe from Juliana's Perfumes for Mojave Ghost by Boredo. So what does this 2025 study tell us about the trends in perfume decluttering on YouTube? Notably, the amount of Middle Eastern fragrances being decluttered has levelled off. It's now plateaued at around 15-16% of all declutters. The market is also clearly diversifying, and Lattafa's dominance is perhaps waning. Although clearly Lattafa is still making up a significant proportion of those declutters, and Lattafa remains the most decluttered brand overall. One other very noticeable trend is the popularity of clean fragrances and the amount of those that are being decluttered. Perhaps this reflects some shift in the amount of PR that those brands are giving out, or perhaps it reflects just the number of releases that they are now producing. The number of clean fragrance brands that I saw being decluttered had also increased from last year, and I think this is an emerging trend in fragrance, along with the rise of smaller niche brands. So just having more brands within the niche category being something that people talk about. It's clear from this analysis that people are more comfortable with decluttering more affordable fragrances. Of course, people are also more likely to own more affordable fragrances and more of those fragrances. But also there may be some effect from PR. So I noticed, particularly in the designer category, the brands that were the most decluttered tend to be the L'Oreal owned brands, and L'Oreal do give out quite a lot of PR. Those brands included Mugler, YSL, Valentino and also Lancome. I think the thing that struck me as well this year about the data set was that even though I looked at more videos overall, I don't feel like the diversity was there in the countries and creators that I was looking at. I felt like most of the creators were based within the US and they were decluttering more fragrances than anybody else. Although there was one creator in Switzerland who created 5 videos within this 104-day period. And clearly they made up quite a large proportion of the declutters as part of my 601 fragrances. It's really important to note that this video only analyses the behaviour of 45 individuals. And we need to wonder how representative those 45 individuals actually are to wider trends. We do not know, and we can never know, the percentage of fragrances owned and decluttered versus the percentage of fragrances owned and kept. So we don't know whether decluttering of particular fragrances simply reflects them having more popularity than other fragrances, which we don't see decluttered. So please do let me know if you've noticed any particular trends in decluttering on YouTube or in the things that you're seeing in declutter videos. Also, if you have enjoyed the video, then please do press the like button and please also consider subscribing, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.